Korea goes easy on pedophiles. China wants to talk to Japan. I answer your question about what it's like to teach at a Korean university, and we head to Ecuador. All this and more. The QiRanger Podcast starts now. Greetings and salutations, my excellent friends. I hope you're having a fantastic Sunday. My name is Steve Miller, the internet's QiRanger, and of course, this is the QiRanger Podcast. I'd like to thank you for joining me this week, and before we jump into the segments, I have a few announcements. Now, since we are approaching October, Joe and I are going to be undertaking a lot of excursions as we start filming for Explore Your Environment. In fact, most weekends in the month of October, we're going to be out of town. So I'm not going to have time to film, edit, and upload podcasts. So this may be the last podcast for a while. I think I'll be able to get one more podcast out during the month of October, but that's about it. Don't hold me to it, but I think that's going to be about it. Also, if you've noticed over on the vlog channel, I'm actually uploading daily vlog videos. I'm having a blast doing that, showing you a little bit of life every single day of what it's like to live in South Korea and as I interact with my environment, whether it be here in Japan or anywhere else around the world. So if you're not subscribed to the vlog channel, I really do encourage you doing that because it'll show you an insight into my everyday life. Now, above and beyond that, everything is always posted on QiRanger.com, so if you aren't subscribed to either of my YouTube channels, you can still get all the information at QiRanger.com, plus a few extra blog posts here and there about timely issues. Now, that being said, there is going to be a change to the podcast. In the past, it's been about an hour-long program, but I want to try something a little bit different. I want to make it a very tight program, sharing with you all the really important stories that impact the region. So I'm going to cut the length in just about half and try to shoot for a half-hour format. Roughly half the podcast will continue to be news, and then we'll continue on with the question of the week and, of course, the travel segment. But I really want to focus on just the absolute important stories that affect the region. That being said, let's get ready for the news. Welcome back to the podcast. As we do every week, we start with lead stories from the Koreas. Representative So Young-gyo asked for a detailed account of the average sentence length of pedophiles in South Korea. The report supplied by the court system was actually staggering, at least in my opinion, because the average sentence to someone who commits and is convicted of a sexual crime against a minor is 3.84 years. That, my friends, is absolutely disgusting. Now, this is also in the wake of new harsher legislation that was passed and put into law that called for a mandatory 5-year sentence for anyone convicted of sex crimes. So the question needs to be asked, how serious is Korea in fighting sexual abuse? More and more reports are coming forward. Now, some may say that sexual crimes are on the increase, and that very well may be true, but also more people are feeling empowered to report them. Slowly, the stigma is going away. After all, last year, President Park Geun-hye's former spokesperson, Yoon, was in the United States, tried to assault an intern, and then came back here and said, oh, I didn't do anything wrong. It was just a misinterpretation of cultural differences. And then after he was sacked, 1,000 women came forward stating that they have been sexually harassed by this individual. With laws so lenient on convicted sex offenders, it's no reason that as time progresses, you see an increase in the number of crimes and a repeat by those same offenders. A recent report that was released just the other week said that there's actually an increase in sexual crimes among middle schoolers and elementary students. So if at that young age there's no discipline, no punishment, no consequence for carrying out those actions, then of course in adulthood they're going to continue on with the same behaviors. If South Korea is going to be serious about prosecuting those individuals that commit sexual crimes, you need to do more than just put them in prison for a minimum of 5 years. The minimum needs to be at least 20 years, if not longer. When you commit a sexual crime, especially against a child, you don't deserve to come out. Kim Jong-un is ordering all overseas station party members to send their children home, or at least some of their children. In a new order issued, all foreign stationed party officials, whether it be at consulates or embassies, are no longer able to take their whole family abroad. The new order states that only one child of the family may accompany the family if those individuals are stationed abroad. The other family members must stay within North Korea. Now, some analysts think that this is being done to shore up Kim's control of those high-ranking party officials and to limit outside influence on those abroad. And that actually may be the case. The truth of the matter is we really don't know exactly how stable the Kim regime is. Some reports are saying that there's infighting, while other reports are saying that Kim has a firm grasp of control and there's nothing to worry about. I don't know what to tell you with this. Last year there was a report about an attempted coup, and that probably didn't happen. And we just see more and more defections from North Korea. So, in my opinion, probably what's going on is a little of both. He wants to limit outside influence, and quite frankly, as the internet continues to permeate North Korea, more and more Western influences are going into North Korea. As they try to expand their influence elsewhere, those stationed abroad are going to be interacting with more individuals from a Western perspective. And young children could actually see that life in North Korea isn't what it's cracked up to be and choose to defect. A few months ago, a high-ranking daughter of a party official actually defected to South Korea. What will be interesting to see is if this policy does reduce the number of defections either directly into South Korea or into China and then later on to South Korea. Now, it should be noted that a similar order was issued by Kim Jong-il in 2007 and was later repealed. So even if this is a short-term order by Kim Jong-un, it may not be all that long-lasting. Who knows what's going to happen? But it is interesting to see that he's trying to separate family members, and that may actually speak more about how he wants to control the adults stationed abroad. Pak Do-chen, a top North Korean official in charge of missile and nuclear development, disappeared in April following the no-show missile launch that we all expected. However, recently he's been spotted out in public, leading some analysts to assume that we will see another long-range missile test within the next few months. Now, this is also corroborated by some U.S. think tanks analyzing satellite images along the Chinese border, where they say they've seen signs of a long-range missile test. Now, it's not really out of the realm of possibility that we will see a long-range missile test. The interesting thing to watch here is how the Western media covers it. One of the biggest problems with the whole April run-up of tension was the way that the Western media was portraying the situation. If you read the reports from CNN, BBC, and other news organizations, you thought that war was imminent. You thought that there was so much tension on the peninsula that people were in a panic. And that just simply wasn't the fact. So if North Korea does continue with its missile program, and there's all signs are pointing that they will, it'll be interesting to see how the West reacts to that. In my opinion, what's going to happen is that North Korea will announce a missile test, and if the Western media continues its current course of action, they will report it and then drop it. And that's the thing that they need to do. By giving North Korea too much press, by giving North Korea too much tension, they play right into North Korea's PR game. And that's exactly what happened in April. You effectively allowed this small state, this small insignificant state, to dictate the world stage. Since then, since North Korea has backed away, the Western media has also said, well, you know what? It was a no-show. It was a non-event. We're not going to play your game anymore. And as long as the Western media continues to do that, then North Korea will be barking loudly and no one will be listening. Now, with the long-range missile, if this is the type of missile that we do expect to see, they could effectively hit Guam or Hawaii in terms of length. Now, we don't know how good the guidance system is, so it could just be a shot in the dark and maybe or maybe not it'll hit anything. But do expect that South Korea, Japan, and the United States, as long as they're in the umbrella of possible coverage, to react with words of caution, saying something along the lines of they don't want to see a missile test, that the tests will violate UN sanctions, and that if the missile comes close, they will of course shoot it down. But beyond that, they really shouldn't do anything. They should react with words of caution, with words of vigilance, and then drop the matter. They shouldn't issue too many ultimatums to North Korea because that's only going to give them exactly what they want. Moving on to East Asian news, China is ready to talk with Japan over the disputed islands, but only if Japan acknowledges that there is in fact a dispute. Up until now, Japan has not acknowledged any dispute, only stating that China is threatening its own territory and that Japan will vigorously defend its territory against all forms of Chinese aggression. Now, this is very important because right now, Japan is essentially playing the same game it is with Korea in not acknowledging that there is any dispute. It's just, we are Japan, we are right. And I'm not disagreeing with their stance at all, I'm just saying that this is their position. So they are not acknowledging that there's any form of dispute. Now, Foreign Minister Wang Yi said, in spite of this, we are still ready to sit down and have a dialogue with the Japanese to work out jointly a way to manage the current situation. I don't see that happening. Hopefully, cooler heads will prevail, and even though China is sending drones in the area and surveillance ships, and that Japan is contemplating situating and stationing foreign officials on the disputed islands and increasing their own surveillance in the area, we won't have someone pushing a button and starting a fight. Like I've said in the past, this regional tension issue is probably the most volatile I have seen in long terms because of its long-reaching implications. If there is a skirmish, you could see a lot of economic fallout because of China and Japan being involved in a fight. And that would be bad for everybody, especially for the United States because of treaty obligations. They would be pulled in to assist Japan. So we need to keep an eye out for this situation. And if any other developments come forward, I'll be sure to let you know. And finally, Japanese netizens have riled up against Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's wife once more. Now, earlier in 2013, she attended a Korean musical concert. And after that concert, several netizens stated that how dare she go to a Korean event. Now, just recently, she participated in a cross-cultural event designed to help share Korean culture in Japan and to foster good relations with the two nations. It's her goal, she's publicly stated this, that having Korea so close and being such close neighbors, it's important to have close ties. However, some netizens have gone on to say, I cannot believe you interacted with South Korea. To her credit, Ms. Abe responded, I know there are various views, but I hope to establish a friendly relationship with South Korea as it is a neighboring country. Now, what I think is important here is not so much that Ms. Abe is trying to bridge the gap and do something that both her husband, Prime Minister Abe, and South Korean President Park Geun-hye have been unable to do because they're just simply thick-headed and not willing to talk to one another. But I think it speaks volume as to the power of netizens, not only in Japan, but also in Korea. Netizens are a very small fragment of the population. However, they have mastered the art of making online comments. And to that effect, once something happens and you get a strong contingent of netizens making comments, the mainline press picks that up. And instead of just tossing those hate-filled comments away, the press gives them validity and makes them feel that they are actually right and emboldens them to do more. In the future, both organizations, Korean press, Japanese press, needs to back away from the netizen angle. They represent such a small fraction of the population at whole that continually giving them press time and making their opinions seem valid is a disservice to everyone. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is the news from the Koreas and East Asia. We'll be back in just a second. Welcome back to the podcast. It's time for the question of the week, and this is one that came in from a few different sources and is about teaching at a university here in Korea. Specifically, what is it like? So I thought I would go over a few details to help give you an answer to that. But as always, if you have any questions for me, you can send those to me at questions@QiRanger.com. So let's get to it. So what is it like teaching at a university? Well, before I get into what it's like in terms of my experiences, you need to realize that there are several different tiers of universities here in Korea. And if you've come to Korea and are teaching, well, at a hagwon, a private academy, you need to understand that several universities, and maybe most universities, do have hagwons associated with them. So some university positions are really hagwon positions, and that's kind of where the name Unigwon came from, because your hours and your course load are just the same as if you're teaching at a hagwon. The only difference is that you're at a university. Now, if you do get a good university job, what you can expect is reduced hours, somewhere between the number of 15 to 20 hours a week, and excellent vacation time, anywhere between 6 weeks and 12 weeks and up per year. It's a great job, but you also need to be qualified for it. One of the things that the Ministry of Education is now clamping down on is that they really want to see professors have master's degrees. Now, in the past, you could get a position at a university with only a bachelor's and experience, and that tendency is starting to go away. I have known several professors who have been teaching for years at universities who have been let go because they don't have the master's. So if you want to teach at a university, I highly recommend getting a master's. You may still be able to find a job and get a job without a master's, but those are becoming increasingly rare. Now, in terms of what kind of classes you teach, it really depends on the university that you're with. Now, where I work, the professors who teach English can do so in what we call a lab class, and that's kind of like an all catch-all type class. I cover vocabulary, writing, reading, speaking, and as well grammar. But several of my other professors also teach speech, presentations, they teach job interview. So it's really across the board. Now, with that, you do need to keep in mind, sometimes you're given a curriculum and sometimes you have to develop it yourself. For the classes that I teach, I have a textbook and a teacher's manual, and I just need to generate lesson plans to teach. However, those that teach, like say, conversation or job interview, a lot of times it's open and that's it. Here's your class, and you need to find a textbook, generate a syllabus, and generate the course objectives and the content for the entire semester. And if you've never done that before, that can be quite daunting. So keep that in mind before signing up for a university position. Now, with grades at a university, those are also sometimes very difficult because a lot of the universities grade on a curve. Now, when I was teaching in the United States, whatever grade you earned in class, that was the grade you received. So if everyone really did the work and got all A's, then everyone got A's. But in Korea, most universities operate under a curve structure. Now, my university, if we have over 10 students in a class, there is a mandatory curve. And the number of A's is a certain percentage of the number of students in class, the number of B's a certain percentage, and roughly half the students must receive a grade of C or lower in the class. And this is ideally going to be reflective of the work that they actually do in class, but on occasion you do have to alter the earned grade to reflect the curve grade, and that is sometimes really hard to do when you have a student who earned a higher grade, but there's too many students in that grade category and you have to drop them. It's honestly, it's heart-wrenching, and I hate doing it, but that's the way it is. You have to grade on a curve, and where you fall on the curve is the grade that you get. Now, with grades, it's also important to notice that that kind of also feeds into how you're evaluated as an instructor. Most universities issue a 2-year contract, meaning that you are guaranteed employment for 2 years. After, say, a year and a half, you're up for review during your final semester on whether or not you'll be able to renew and continue teaching at the institution. Now, some institutions operate in different ways. Sometimes you can't get a renewal, and sometimes you can only renew once. But a lot of times the renewal evaluation is 50-50. 50% based on your performance as observed by the department, and 50% based on your teaching review from your student's perspective. So if you are a very hard instructor, very rigid, and you don't give A's, you don't give B's, and students generally don't have a good time in class, your reviews could be quite low, and you don't get rehired. Even though you may be a phenomenal teacher, if the students aren't necessarily having a good time in class, they don't feel you're prepared, or maybe you don't use a textbook enough, they could actually give you a low score, and then you won't get hired for that. So one thing when you teach at a university you have to be very cognizant about is managing the dichotomy of it. The university expectations and the student expectations, so that your evaluations are high on both sides. So if you can renew, you do get that job offer after 2 years. So I hope that answered a few questions as to what it's like to teach at a university. Like I said, if you have any questions for me, please shoot me a message at questions@QiRanger.com. I'll be happy to get back to you, either in a personalized video response over on the vlog channel, here in the podcast, or through email. Bifurcating the equator, this volcanic archipelago is one of the world's most famous, the Galapagos. They rest off the coast of Ecuador and played a major role in Charles Darwin developing his theory on evolution. Join me as we trek around the globe exploring the world's national parks. This is QiRanger RTW, Travel Talk Around the World. Just take me away. Yes, my friends, that's right. This week we are talking about the Galapagos off the coast of Ecuador. And how cool is that? I mean, think back. I mean, really just think back at the importance and influence that this particular national park has on what we understand the world to be today. When I was in college, I was a biology major. More importantly, I was an evolutionary biology major, which meant that I studied how plants and animals developed over time. And from a personal perspective, I enjoyed animal biology and comparative vertebrate anatomy so much more than plant anatomy. It was not nearly as interesting. But to see the way that animals developed over time was just fascinating. To see the way that reptiles and birds and humans share the same structures and the same core morphology is just amazing. So before we get into some of the details about the Galapagos, let me read a little bit about it from the UNESCO World Heritage Site. Now, situated in the Pacific Ocean, some 1,000 kilometers from the South American continent, these 19 islands and the surrounding marine reserves have been called a unique living museum and showcase of evolution. Located at the confluence of 3 ocean currents, the Galapagos are a melting pot of marine species. Ongoing seismic and volcanic activity reflects the processes that form the islands. These processes, together with the extreme isolation of the islands, led to the development of unusual animal life, such as the land iguana, the giant tortoise, and the many types of finch, that inspired Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection following his visit in 1835. The first recorded visit to the islands happened by chance in 1535 when the Dominican friar Fray Thomas Berlanga went to Peru to arbitrate a dispute between Francisco Pizarro and his subordinates. De Berlanga was blown off course, though he eventually returned to the Spanish Empire and described the conditions of the islands and the animals that inhabited them. Ambrose Cowley may have made the first navigational chart of the islands in 1684. He named the individual islands after some of his fellow pirates, or after some of the British noblemen who helped the privateers' cause. More recently, the Ecuadorian government gave most of the islands Spanish names. Now, currently there are 18 islands with a land area of greater than 1 square kilometer. And up until 1969, the only way to get to the islands was by private charter. Now, since then, beginning in April of 1969 or so, several travel agencies started setting up shop, setting up hotels, and having cruise itineraries where you could go there in wooden boats and now somewhat decent ships. Today, there are about 85 yachts and ships equipped for overnight guests, but are limited by the government to up to 16 to 100 passengers. And I think that that is awesome, because one of the things that I would love to do is that since there are 18 islands, you really can't fully explore and fully get to know the importance of the Galapagos if you just go for a few hours. By taking a cruise and staying there for a day or two, overnight, whether it be in a hotel or on a yacht where you can sleep on board and then travel from place to place, you really get an idea of the diversity of species located in this remote location. Now, in May of 2013, Google announced it would be adding the Galapagos Islands to its Street View mapping service, which I think is brilliant, because if you are physically unable to travel there, whether for financial reasons or you just maybe you dislike the sea, you don't want to travel from the coast of Ecuador into the Galapagos area, you soon will have the opportunity to take a look at these majestic volcanic islands through Google Earth, which I think is cool and speaks volume to the level of technology that we have today. So, some things about the Galapagos. Now, many backpackers have this on their list of top destinations, and it's actually fairly inexpensive and one of the most diverse ecological locations on the planet. A lot of times people will stay in hostels or these little hotel type cruises, and as long as you book in advance and do so wisely, it won't break your bank. Now, speaking from a scientist's perspective, I would love to go there to look at the individual species. I think one of the things that I would probably really want to focus on is the tortoises and the iguanas. I love reptiles, and taking a look at them would be amazing to see any kind of similarities and, more importantly, the differences between the species on the different islands. Because one of the things about the Galapagos is sometimes you have one species of one animal on a single island and then a different species of the same animal on a different island. And to compare and contrast them would just make me giddy. It really would. That's one of the things I just find so fascinating about science. Now, the landscape itself is visually stunning, and if you are an animal lover and like diverse species, this is someplace you need to go. You can sit there and just take picture after picture after picture, and they will all be stunning. It's something that I think a lot of people really enjoy doing, and one of the main attractions there. Now, because of the high traffic there, the area is now endangered of arrival to new species. Now, meaning that is more species coming in because of all the boat traffic of tourists coming to the island. Now, it should also be noted that there are no indigenous human population to the islands, but now there are close to 30,000 people that live on the islands, and that specific impact cannot be ignored either. These islands were not designed to sustain humans. And as more and more humans live there, because of the resort structure, because of the ships coming in, it impacts the natural selection process, but also really impacts the environment as to how the indigenous population is able to sustain itself. Like so many places around the world, eventually preservation will win out over tourism, and no one will probably be able to go there. I foresee a time in the future where a lot of these tour operators will have to close down. We see this with a lot of older UNESCO World Heritage Sites and national parks around the world, where ancient populations had domiciles or had structures that were fairly well trafficked in their infancy of being parks. But as more and more people went to them, they actually deteriorated to a state where they could no longer be preserved. So they actually had to scale back the impact of the human visitor to such a degree that either they completely closed it out or it was limited to only a few people per day, a few thousand per year. But otherwise, until then, I really do encourage you to go because I think you'll have a fantastic time. Well, that'll be it for Travel Talk Around the World. I'll be back in just a second. Well, my friends, that will just about do it for this week's edition of the QiRanger Podcast. I'd like to thank you so much for joining me here on YouTube or downloading the audio version from QiRanger.com or iTunes. To keep up with everything that I do, make sure you follow me on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Just look for @QiRanger. And to keep up with everything I post online, head over to QiRanger.com. Now, if you have some ideas or feedback about the podcast, please shoot me a message at podcast@QiRanger.com. So until next time, remember to be true to yourself and always be awesome. The QiRanger Podcast is written and produced by Steve Miller and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Unported license. Morning Blue was written and performed by Josh Woodward.